Hi, Ellen Spiegel here. Thanks for tuning in. Today we're going to be talking a little bit more about authenticity, why it's important, and how being your authentic self can actually help you reach your goals. So as you know, I was in the Nevada Legislature for 10 years, but I didn't always start out being politically active. In fact, I was a nonpartisan for my whole life, from the time I turned 18 and registered to vote until the time I moved to Nevada 22 years ago. I voted in every single election. I was always very policy oriented and I was always very civic oriented. So I always voted, but I didn't belong to a political party. And especially when I was growing up, there didn't seem to be a big difference between the two political parties. I know that's hard to understand today because of where we are, but especially growing up in New York, there just wasn't a whole lot of difference. So there was no reason for me to pick and for me to join a party. Over time, I figured out, especially as the parties became very different from one another, that I did belong to a political party, and I became a Democrat when we moved to Nevada. My husband, Bill, on the other hand, was a lifelong Democrat. We moved to Nevada, and he wanted to meet Democrats. We live in Henderson, which is now the second largest city in the state. When we got here, he asked people, said, so where is there a Democratic Club in Henderson? And people kind of looked at him and said, well, there aren't any Democrats in Henderson. He said, that's ridiculous. Of course there are Democrats in Henderson. The man who was Speaker of the Assembly at the time, Richard Perkins, is a Democrat who was from Henderson. Bill said, you can't have a speaker from Henderson if there aren't any Democrats in Henderson. It took some time, and over a couple of years, my husband ultimately reached out to Speaker Perkins to ask about setting up a Democratic Club. Turns out that there had been a Democratic Club in Henderson, and Speaker Perkins was the last president of the club, and he agreed to help Bill restart the club. I, of course, being tech-oriented, said that I would be there to help my husband, and I would put together the email list and the mailing list and start working on the website and doing all of those supportive things that you need to do if you're going to start a successful organization. So we go to the first meeting of the Henderson Democratic Club, and Bill and I wind up getting installed as the two officers in formation. He's the president, and I'm the secretary. As we got the group chartered and officially became recognized by the county and then by the state, we had to put in a permanent board, and I wound up getting arm twisted and talked into being on the board. So here I was, this totally non-political person who was cajoled into being on the board of a Democratic club. I'd never been politically active. This was something that just seemed totally out of character and out of alignment with me. But I did it. And eventually, over time, I kept moving up through the ranks. And I finally got to the point where I became president of the Henderson Democratic Club. At the same time, we were living in this wonderful community, which I adored and actually still adore. And we were in this subdivision that had an empty lot as you were coming into the subdivision. And everybody, when we bought our houses, asked what that empty lot was zoned for. And we were all told it was zoned for school or church. We all said, okay, that's fine. We're good with that. Except it turns out that we were all given misinformation. One of the approved uses was an assisted living facility. When a developer came to develop that lot, the neighbors all became irate for various reasons, but it all stemmed from the fact that we were all given misinformation about what an approved use of that lot would be. I was opposed because, as it turned out, there was a loophole in Nevada law that said that an assisted living facility could be an assisted living facility but not provide all assisted living services. And this developer did not want to be licensed as an assisted living facility. And many of the neighbors felt that this was a ploy to not actually build an assisted living facility, but to put in some high density apartments through a loophole that he would then have this building built not to assisted living facility specs, that it would then fail. And then he would turn around and say, well, we have this building, it's got to be an apartment. And nobody wanted that. There were many, many reasons why neighbors were incensed, but it all boiled down to misinformation. I, on the other hand, felt very strongly that all of the neighbors' concerns would be addressed if the developer would be licensed as an assisted living facility. So I wound up being co-leader of the opposition. And when it came time for the city council to be discussing this permit, I had done a lot of research, as did Bill. We spent that whole summer doing lots and lots of research into city code and planning. And we had agreed on almost every single point of contention between the neighbors and the developers. We got total agreement except for the point of licensure. We decided that there'd be one person from each side presenting to the city council. I'll never forget meeting with the mayor. It was the first time I had ever met one of my elected officials, and oh my goodness, was I nervous. I still remember it. In fact, I saw him recently. We were talking about it, and he said that I didn't come across that nervous, but believe me, I was really nervous. So anyway, so we're before the city council. We're having this presentation, and the only two people who were going to be speaking were me representing all of the neighbors, and I'm not an attorney, so it was just me, Ellen, neighbor, and the developer's attorney, who was a former city attorney. At the time that I was doing this, one of my neighbors, someone I knew who had been involved in a lot of things politically, said to me, you know, Ellen, you can't go up against a developer in Henderson and win. You just cannot do it. And I said, just watch. If you believe that, you really don't know me. So as I'm making my presentation, I said, if you look at city code, it all boils down to how you read a word that is spelled Permitted. And if you read city code and you say that the facility has to be permitted, as in allowed, to perform all of these services, then no, it doesn't have to be licensed under state law. But if you read the word as permitted, Permitted, it means that these are the things that are included in the permit. And if it's included in the permit and it stipulates that all of these things or any of these things can be performed, then it has to be licensed as an assisted living facility. But you know what? The neighbors won. And an assisted living facility was built. It is a beautiful facility. I'm really proud, and I was very proud to have it in the neighborhood, and everybody really likes it. They did a beautiful, beautiful job with it. Interestingly enough, 6 months later, the developer came to me and said, you know, Ellen, I'm really glad you got me to have it licensed because it was the only thing that let me get the funding I needed to actually build this. So that all worked out well. But as a result, I got to know the people on the HOA and the HOA board. And the next thing I knew, I was chairing the neighborhood social committee, and I was planning the garage sales and the pool parties. And then I also wound up on the HOA board as well. So I have this one track where I'm getting more and more increasingly involved in the community. I'm outspoken. I'm doing right by the people in the community, and I'm achieving results. And I'm doing this as Ellen, just as neighborhood lady Ellen. And then at the same time, I'm also having this progression in Democratic things, in Democratic circles. There was a new training program that was being launched in Nevada called Emerge. Emerge is a training program for Democratic women who want to be running for office. And I was asked if I would be perhaps interested in running at some point in the future. And I said, you know, I think I would be. I was in the very first class of Emerge Nevada. And after I graduated, actually right before I graduated, we were at a fundraising picnic for the Emerge group. And it was announced that I had decided to run for state assembly. And even though I had thought about running for state assembly, I wasn't really ready to make an announcement. But it was announced as I was getting up to speak. And then somebody out in the audience actually sat down and wrote me my very, very first campaign contribution check. So now here I was, an announced candidate with a contribution check. And you know what? That made me a candidate. So I started running. So as I thought about the seat and I thought about the incumbent, I'd reflected that the current assemblyman was a really nice man named Bob Beers, but Bob was very, very conservative. In fact, in 2007, he tied for being the most conservative legislator in Nevada. So he was way over here to the right, whereas I'm kind of over here much more moderate. And I thought that our district, even though it was a Republican district, was more moderate than someone who is the most conservative legislator in the state. So I ran. And Bob, though, in 2008, faced a very interesting and challenging primary. He was primaried by somebody who was running to his right. Now, his primary opponent was someone who had run 2 years before in a different district, in a different part of the Las Vegas Valley. So was not someone who came from the community, was not somebody who had long-term stakes in our neighborhood, in our community. And the thing is that this fellow who primaried Bob was not running as his true authentic self. When he had run 2 years before, running in that other district, he ran as himself and he lost. So now he was running as, at least I've been told, with this other persona that was to Bob's right, and he won. He won the primary. Well, he won the primary, he won the battle, but he lost the war. And here's what happened. The morning after Bob lost his primary, he sent me an email and offered me all of his leftover contributions, all the money in his campaign fund. It was about $1,400. I was shocked. I was absolutely shocked. But Bob said he knew that I had a good heart. He knew that I cared about the community. He knew I was passionate. And he said, even though we disagree on policy issues, my heart was in the right place. And he wanted somebody who was going to be genuine and authentic in that role, much more so than he wanted somebody who was more in agreement with him on policy issues. I said to Bob, let's have lunch. I got together with Bob and his lovely wife, Julie, for lunch. And we were talking and I said, okay, Bob, I thought about it. And, you know, it's a little bit difficult for a Democrat to accept your campaign funds. It's just a little awkward, but it was really a lot of money. It was $1,400, which doesn't sound like a lot of money, but since nobody expected me to win, it was really a lot of money to my campaign. And I said, but as I think about it, your name was trashed and it's really not right. And I can take your money, but I have a condition. And Bob looked at me and he said, you have a condition? What kind of condition? And I said, I want to take the money and I want to use it so that you can get your name back. And he was intrigued. And he wound up writing a letter on his letterhead that he wrote and signed and reclaimed his identity and explained why he was supporting me and that he was supporting me and explaining that I came from the community and I'm a leader in the community. And he conveyed to them that I'm a business owner and all of these things about myself that are all true and all things that I was telling people, but he did it in a way to people who were Republican primary voters. And because it came from him, they were able to listen and they were able to hear my message. He helped me in another way too. As we were going through the campaign, I said, you know, this fellow who I'm running against now is somebody who is not the fellow that he purports to be, because nobody changes that much in 2 years. Either he was inauthentic then or he's inauthentic now. It's one of them. And he really seemed almost like a snake oil salesman. So I called Bob, and Bob is a really, really talented artist. And I called Bob and I said, Bob, would you mind creating a caricature that we could use in campaign materials and that really conveys the essence of my opponent, who is somebody who just wants to win no matter what, wants to be in the legislature more than he necessarily wants to be doing what's right for our community. And Bob said, without missing a beat, he said, well, I'll do it, but I have a condition. I started laughing. I was like, okay, this is our relationship. I said, Bob, what's your condition? And he said, I have to sign my name really big so that everyone can see it. I said, okay. And he made this fabulous graphic that we used. And you know what? It worked. The authentic candidate, me, won. Authenticity ruled the day. And it's just one little example, but it explains and it illustrates that you have to be yourself. You'll win in the long run. People say fake it till you make it. It just doesn't work. So don't do it. I was me. I didn't change who I was. I did not believe in changing who I was. I never believe in changing who I am. You've heard me say, what you see is what you get. It's true. You need to lean into being your authentic person. You need to be yourself. You need to play into your strengths and you need to mitigate your weaknesses. I spoke about that in a prior video that you can check out right here. I'm putting up a link. And take that advice and take it to heart. And if you have questions, please feel free to email me. My email address is ellenbspiegel, E-L-L-E-N, the letter B, Spiegel, S-P-I-E-G-E-L, @gmail.com. or you can put questions in the comments and I'll be sure to answer them. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. And regardless, thanks for tuning in. Hope you have a great day. Till next time. Bye.